A cop is sentenced to death for a crime he swears he didn't commit. With time running out, his loyal German shepherd refuses to move on, sensing something no one else does. Then, just days before the execution, the dog does something no one ever expected, leading to a shocking discovery that could change everything. But will the truth come out in time to save his life? And what secret has been buried for so long that only his dog can uncover it? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the packed courtroom, casting harsh shadows across Owen Cooper's face as he sat rigid in the defendant's chair. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the wooden armrest, his police training doing little to calm his racing heart. The jury filed in, their faces carefully blank, avoiding his gaze. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Martinez's voice cut through the thick silence. We have, Your Honor, the jury foreman stood, his hands trembling slightly as he held the paper. Owen's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail, like he'd been trained to do. His attorney, James Bennett, stared at his notepad, shoulders slumped in defeat. Across the aisle, District Attorney Peterson's lips curled into a slight smile. In the back row, Ava Mitchell sat perfectly still, her face a mask that gave nothing away. She'd been his partner for 5 years, but now she seemed like a stranger. In the matter of the state versus Owen Cooper, on the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty, the foreman continued. The words hit Owen like a physical blow. Murmurs and gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jury recommends death by lethal injection, the foreman added, his voice cracking slightly. Owen clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. His mind raced through the evidence that had sealed his fate. The gunshot residue they'd found on his hands. The grainy video showing someone who looked just like him entering Wes's apartment. The witness who swore she'd seen him there that night. It was perfect. Too perfect. But he knew the truth. He hadn't killed Daniel West. The bailiffs approached with handcuffs. Owen stood slowly, his legs feeling like lead as they led him toward the door. He caught Ava's eye. She sat straight back in her chair, but something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe, or regret. Outside the courthouse, Atlas waited with his temporary handler. The German shepherd's ears perked up at the sound of the heavy doors opening. When Owen appeared in handcuffs, Atlas's whole body tensed. He barked sharply, pulling against his leash with such force that the handler stumbled forward. Easy, boy, the handler muttered, struggling to hold him back. Atlas's barks grew more frantic as Owen was escorted to the prisoner transport van. The dog knew something was wrong. He could sense it, but Owen didn't look back. He couldn't look back as the van doors slammed shut. Later that night, Owen lay on the thin prison mattress, staring at the gray ceiling of his cell. The reality of his situation crashed over him in waves. Death row. He was going to die for a crime he didn't commit. Across town, Ava unlocked her apartment door, Atlas trailing behind her. She told herself she was just giving him a temporary home until other arrangements could be made, but the dog seemed to have other plans. He paced restlessly between the door and the window, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Every few minutes, he'd stop and whine, looking at Ava with desperate eyes. He's not coming, boy, she whispered. But Atlas just resumed his pacing, waiting for a master who wouldn't return. The metal door of cell 2187 slammed shut with a hollow clang that seemed to echo through Owen's bones. The cramped space felt like it was closing in on him. Bare concrete walls, a narrow cot with a thin mattress, and a stainless steel toilet sink combination that looked like it had seen better days. No window. Just artificial light that buzzed overhead, constant and unforgiving. Welcome home, pig, someone shouted from down the block, followed by cruel laughter and more taunts. The voices blended into a distant hum as Owen stood motionless in the center of his cell, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. This was death row, his new reality. Hours passed like molasses. A guard appeared with a plastic food tray, sliding it through the slot without a word. Owen stared at the gray mass that was supposed to be meatloaf, the lumpy potatoes, the wilted vegetables. His stomach turned. He pushed the tray aside and sat on his cot, staring at the blank wall. His attorney would file an appeal. That's what they all did, but Owen knew the statistics. Death row appeals rarely succeeded. The thought hit him like a physical blow. He might actually die here, strapped to a table with poison in his veins, for a murder he didn't commit. Across town, Ava watched Atlas pace her apartment for the third straight hour. His food bowl sat untouched, water barely touched. The German shepherd's nails clicked against her hardwood floors as he moved from the door to the window and back again, letting out occasional whines that broke her heart. "Come on, boy," she finally said, grabbing his leash. "Let's get some air." Atlas perked up at the sight of the leash, but as soon as they hit the sidewalk, he had his own agenda. He pulled hard, nearly yanking the leash from her grip, heading determinedly toward the waterfront. "Atlas, heel," she commanded, but the dog ignored her. They hadn't been to the docks in months, not since that last case she'd worked with Owen. Atlas dragged her past the warehouse houses, his nose working overtime, moving with such urgency that it made her uneasy. This wasn't just a dog following old patrol routes. This was something else. In his cell, Owen lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed that final day of freedom. He'd been following leads on Daniel West's murder, checking security footage from nearby businesses. Something about the timing hadn't added up. Then, suddenly, SWAT had surrounded him. Weapons drawn, no warning, no explanation, just cuffs and custody. He turned on his side, the thin mattress offering little comfort. None of it made sense. The evidence against him had appeared out of nowhere, perfectly packaged and completely damning. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to put him here. The question that kept him awake wasn't whether he'd been framed. He knew he had been. The real questions were, who had done this to him, and why did they want him to take the fall so badly? The first rays of dawn hadn't yet touched the sky when Ava jolted awake to Atlas's persistent whining. She rolled over in bed, squinting at the clock for 37 a.m. The German shepherd stood by her bedside, his tail low, making that same distressed sound that had become all too familiar over the past 2 days. "Atlas, please," she mumbled, running a hand over her face, but the dog wouldn't settle. He paced between her bed and the door, his nails clicking against the floor with increasing urgency. Ava threw back her covers with a sigh. "Fine, you win," she muttered. She pulled on her jacket over her pajamas and grabbed his leash. Atlas practically dragged her down the 3 flights of stairs to the street. The city was eerily quiet at this hour, with only the occasional delivery truck rumbling past. Atlas pulled hard on his leash, heading straight for the waterfront again. Ava's feet dragged as she followed, the cold morning air biting at her cheeks. "What is it with you and the docks lately?" she asked, but Atlas ignored her, his nose working overtime. He led her past the chain-link fence and into the industrial area, stopping near an abandoned warehouse. Its windows were broken, and its walls were covered in graffiti. Atlas circled a specific spot near the loading dock, sniffing intently at the ground. Ava watched Atlas, puzzled by his focused behavior. Then something caught her eye, a small piece of fabric partially buried in the dirt. Crouching down, she carefully picked it up. The material was rough and thick, with charred edges that crumbled at her touch. It felt familiar somehow, like the heavy-duty uniform material used in police gear. Later that night, Ava spread the crime scene photos across her kitchen table. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago as she studied every detail. Daniel West's body had been found wearing a dark jacket, but it was clearly civilian clothing, nothing like the burnt scrap she'd found. She held the fabric up to the light. The weave was distinctive, industrial grade, exactly like the material used in police tactical gear. Her heartbeat quickened as the implications started to sink in. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was her friend Marcus, a court clerk who owed her a favor. "Got that update you wanted," he said. handing her a manila envelope. Owen's appeal was denied this morning. Across town in his cell, Owen sat perfectly still as his attorney delivered the same news. The lawyer's words washed over him like white noise. Technical terms about procedural issues and insufficient grounds for appeal. We knew this might happen, the attorney said carefully. But this is just the first step. We can file. Save it. Owen cut him off. We both know how this goes. His voice was steady, betraying none of the anger churning inside him. He'd expected this outcome. It was all part of the game. Whoever had set him up had done their homework. Back in her apartment, Ava turned the scrap of fabric over and over in her hands. Taking this to the department would be useless. They'd close ranks the moment Owen was arrested. The case was closed, filed away, forgotten. Atlas lay at her feet, his ears suddenly perking up. A low growl rumbled in his chest as she examined the burnt cloth again. Something about this piece of evidence made her skin crawl. Something was very, very wrong here. The morning air was thick with fog as Ava pulled into the empty parking lot near the docks. Atlas sat in the passenger seat, his ears forward, completely focused. This time, she came prepared with an evidence collection kit she'd kept from her detective days. Latex gloves, small plastic bags, and a few basic tools. "Okay, boy," she said, clipping on his leash. "Show me what I missed." Atlas led her straight to the same spot by the warehouse, his nose working the ground in determined circles. Ava knelt beside him, pulling on her gloves. The burnt fabric had been here. What else might she find? She began carefully clearing away loose dirt and debris. That's when she saw it, the glint of brass catching the weak morning light. Half buried in the packed earth was a spent bullet casing. Her hands trembled slightly as she photographed it and carefully extracted it from the dirt. 2 hours later, she sat in a cluttered basement lab across town. Dr. Martin Chun, a retired forensic analyst who'd helped her on countless cases before, examined the casing under his microscope. "This is interesting," he muttered, making notes. "The strain don't match the ballistics report from the West murder at all." He looked up at Ava. "And it's definitely not from Owen's service weapon either. Different caliber entirely." Ava's heart raced. This was it. The first real evidence that something wasn't right. "Could you document that officially?" she asked. "Already doing it," Chin said, reaching for his camera. Back at her apartment, Ava spread out printouts of West's final articles. The journalist had been working on a series of pieces about police corruption. Most were unfinished, but one name appeared repeatedly in his notes. Deputy Chief Marcus Holloway. West had been building a case against him, tracking suspicious financial transactions and unexplained promotions. Meanwhile, in his cell, Owen watched Officer Green make his third pass of the morning. The guard's eyes lingered too long. His questions were too specific. "Must be tough," Green said, pausing at Owen's cell. "Being a cop here, especially after such a high-profile case." Owen kept his expression neutral. "Just doing my time." That appeal getting denied? Rough break. But maybe it's better to accept things, Stop fighting what's coming. The words carried a weight that made Owen's skin crawl. Green wasn't just a nosy guard. He was reporting to someone who wanted to make sure Owen never left this place alive. In her dimly lit apartment, Ava reviewed her notes for the 10th time. The bullet casing was proof, real physical proof that could help reopen Owen's case. But she needed more. The department wouldn't overturn a conviction on one piece of evidence, especially with so many powerful people invested in keeping Owen behind bars. She was about to close her laptop when Atlas suddenly lifted his head from his bed in the corner. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he stared at the front door. Ava froze, listening to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The shadow under her door made her pulse quicken. She watched, frozen in place, as the handle moved ever so slightly. Atlas remained beside her, his muscular body tense and alert. A continuous low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. The German shepherd's eyes never left the door. Seconds stretched like hours. Finally, the shadow moved away. Ava counted to 30 in her head before approaching the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, showing no sign of the mysterious visitor. Her hands shaking slightly, Ava did a thorough sweep of her apartment. Nothing seemed disturbed. All windows were locked, all rooms exactly as she left them. But the timing sent chills down her spine. She had just found evidence that could help prove Owen's innocence, and now this? "Come on, Atlas," she whispered, gathering the evidence into her shoulder bag. "We need to go." 20 minutes later, she pulled up outside a modest apartment building in the city's journalism district. Noah Park's place was on the 3rd floor, and he answered her knock with suspicious eyes that softened when he recognized her. "Detective Mitchell," he said, stepping aside to let her and Atlas in. "This is unexpected." "I need your help," Ava said, pulling out the bullet casing and related documents. "It's about Daniel West's murder." Noah's initial skepticism was clear on his face as she explained everything. Atlas's behavior at the docks, finding the casing, and Dr. Chen's analysis. But when he started going through West's old notes, his expression changed dramatically. "Look at this," he said, pulling out a worn notebook. The night before he died, Daniel wrote about meeting someone at the docks. He never specified who, but Noah's finger traced the hastily scribbled words. He was convinced this meeting would break open his whole investigation into police corruption. "The case was closed before anyone could follow up on it," Ava said. The pieces were starting to fit together. Meanwhile, in his prison cell, Owen lifted his dinner tray from the slot and found a small piece of paper underneath. His blood ran cold as he read the message. "Stop asking questions. You're already dead." Back at Noah's apartment, Ava gathered her things to leave. But as she approached her car in the parking lot, something caught her eye. A folded piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. With trembling fingers, she opened it and read the message that made her stomach drop. "Drop this or next time we won't knock." Ava sat at her kitchen table, staring at the threatening note under the harsh glow of her desk lamp. Atlas lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on her. She hadn't even tried going to bed. Sleep felt impossible with her mind racing through all the implications. The threat was precise, calculated. Someone had been watching her, tracking her movements. They knew about the evidence she'd found, about her visit to Noah. This wasn't random harassment. This was a warning from people with resources and reach. When morning finally came, Ava's first move was to contact Luis Vega, one of West's trusted sources. The ex-con might have crucial information about what the journalist had uncovered before his death. Vega had agreed to meet, sounding nervous but willing on the phone. But when Ava pulled up to his rundown apartment building, her heart sank. The door to his unit stood wide open, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Drawing her weapon, Ava entered carefully. The apartment was destroyed. Furniture lay overturned, cushions slashed open, papers scattered everywhere. Every drawer had been yanked out and emptied onto the floor. Picture frames lay shattered, their contents torn to pieces. "Louise," she called out, but the silence told her everything she needed to know. Vega was gone. Following procedure, she called it in. Within minutes, other officers arrived, treating it like a routine break-in. One of them found Vega's phone, smashed beyond repair, in a dumpster behind the building. "Looks like your guy split town," her former colleague, Martinez, said with a shrug. "These ex-cons, they get spooked easy. Probably had some old debts catch up to them." But Ava knew better. This wasn't someone running. This was someone being silenced. Meanwhile, in the cold confines of the prison, Owen felt Officer Green's eyes on him constantly. The guard watched him during meals, during yard time, even lingering outside his cell more than necessary. "Something on your mind, Green?" Owen finally asked during lunch, tired of the surveillance. Green stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "There are people outside who don't want you leaving this place alive, Cooper. Don't make it worse for yourself." Owen kept his expression neutral, but inside his mind raced. The warning confirmed what he'd suspected. His conviction wasn't just about punishment. Someone wanted him dead, and they were using the system to make it happen legally. Back in the city, Ava's phone buzzed with a call from Noah. His voice was urgent, excited. "I checked security footage from the businesses near Vega's apartment," he said quickly. "You need to see this." Two men in masks dragged him into a black SUV at 3 a.m. He didn't run, Ava. They took him. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Jerry's Diner, a worn-down establishment on the outskirts of town. Ava slid into a booth across from Noah, who was already nursing his third cup of coffee. His eyes were red-rimmed from hours of reviewing security footage. "We're dealing with someone who knows how to work the system," Noah said quietly, sliding a USB drive across the table. "This was nearly wiped clean, but I managed to recover some footage from the docks. Timestamp shows it was taken 2 hours before Wes was killed." Ava plugged the drive into her laptop, and they huddled over the screen. The grainy footage showed a figure in what was clearly a police-issued jacket dragging something heavy out of frame. The quality was poor, but one detail stood out crystal clear: a distinctive scar on the figure's left hand, visible in the harsh security light. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that scar before at countless department meetings and functions. Deputy Chief Marcus Holloway had gotten it years ago, a knife wound that had never properly healed. "This could be what we need," she whispered, her hand shaking slightly as she ejected the drive. Meanwhile, in the prison's general exercise area, Owen was caught off guard. 3 inmates surrounded him, moving with practiced coordination. The first punch caught him in the kidney, dropping him to his knees. He managed to block the second attack, but the third inmate got him from behind. Owen fought back hard, his police training kicking in. He landed several solid hits, but they had numbers on their side. Just as one of them pulled out a makeshift knife, Officer Green appeared, breaking up the fight with his baton as the inmates scattered. Green leaned close to Owen, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told you to stop asking questions." Then he walked away, leaving Owen breathing heavily on the concrete floor, understanding dawning in his eyes. This wasn't random violence. It was orchestrated, a message delivered with fists and threats. Later that night, Ava was reviewing the footage again when a sharp knock echoed through her apartment. Atlas immediately tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Ava grabbed her service weapon and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, she saw no one. Her heart pounding, she opened the door slowly, gun ready. There, on her welcome mat, sat a small cardboard box. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, covered in dried blood, was Owen's police badge. The sight of it made her stomach lurch. This wasn't just another warning. This was a declaration of war. Ava burst through Noah's apartment door without knocking, her hands trembling as she held Owen's bloody badge. Noah jumped up from his desk, scattering papers across the floor. "Someone inside the department left this at my door," she said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "This badge was logged into evidence. They're sending us a message." Noah took the badge carefully, examining it under his desk lamp. "The blood's real," he said grimly. "And you're right. Only someone with access to the evidence locker could have gotten this." Ava paced the small apartment, running her fingers through her hair. "We need to talk to Owen. He might know something we don't." Using an old connection from her days in Vice, Ava managed to arrange a private visit to the prison. The guards led her through a maze of stark corridors to a small interview room. When Owen walked in, his orange jumpsuit bright against the gray walls, his face hardened at the sight of her. "You shouldn't be here," he warned, his voice low and urgent. Ava leaned forward, keeping her voice steady. Atlas found a bullet casing at the docks, different caliber than the murder weapon. Then Louis Vega disappeared, grabbed by 2 men in an SUV. And there's footage, Owen, security camera footage from the dock, showing someone in a police jacket. Owen listened intently, his jaw muscles working as she spoke. When she mentioned the distinctive scar on the figure's hand, his face went completely blank. "It was him," Owen said finally, his words barely above a whisper. "Holloway was the one who arrested me. He was first on the scene at West's apartment." Owen's hands clenched into fists on the table. If anyone could have planted evidence, it was him. The realization settled over them both like a heavy blanket. Owen had been framed, and the person responsible was one of the most powerful men in the department. As Ava walked back to her car after the visit, her phone buzzed in her pocket. The message on the screen made her blood run cold. "This is your final warning. Next time, the dog dies first." She looked over at Atlas, sitting patiently in the passenger seat of her car. His tail wagged slightly at the sight of her, completely unaware of the threat. Ava's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. They had just made this personal. Ava sat motionless in her car outside the prison, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her phone. The threat was crystal clear. "This is your final warning. Next time, the dog dies first." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the steering wheel, rage and fear mixing in her chest. Atlas whimpered softly from the passenger seat, sensing her distress. This wasn't just about proving Owen's innocence anymore. Now, they were threatening her partner. Without hesitation, she started the car and drove straight to the outskirts of town, where her old mentor, Detective Ray Callahan, lived. His house was small but well-maintained, with security cameras mounted discreetly at every corner. He answered the door before she could knock, his weathered face creased with concern. "You look like hell, kid," Ray said, ushering her and Atlas inside. In his cluttered living room, Ava laid out everything: the bullet casing, Atlas's discovery, Vega's disappearance, the security footage showing someone with Holloway's distinctive scar. Ray listened silently, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. When she finished, Ray leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "You're about to go to war with people who don't lose, Ava. Holloway's got friends in every precinct, every courthouse. He's untouchable." "No one's untouchable," Ava replied firmly. "I need you to dig into his past. There has to be something, anything we can use to expose him." Meanwhile, in the prison, guards escorted Owen through dimly lit corridors to a different cell block. The official reason was security concerns, but Owen knew better. His new cell was smaller, darker, and came with an unexpected surprise: a cellmate. Victor Crane sat on the bottom bunk, his prison-pale skin marked with faded tattoos. Owen recognized him immediately: a former cop from Holloway's unit, convicted of murder 3 years ago. As soon as the guards left, Crane stood up slowly, moving close to Owen. His breath was hot against Owen's ear as he whispered, "You're not getting out of here alive." Back at Ray's house, Ava gathered her notes, preparing to leave. She checked her phone one last time and froze. A new message had arrived, with an attachment. When she opened it, her stomach dropped. It was a photo of her apartment door, taken from just outside the peephole, centered in the frame like a bullseye. Ava's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she raced home, her mind racing faster than the car. Atlas sat rigid in the passenger seat, his ears twitching at every sound, picking up on her fear. The German shepherd's usual calm demeanor had been replaced by an alertness that made the hair on the back of Ava's neck stand up. She parked across the street from her apartment building, scanning the area carefully. Nothing seemed out of place. No suspicious vehicles, no lurking figures. But that photo of her door meant someone had been here recently. "Stay close," she whispered to Atlas as they made their way inside. Drawing her gun, Ava methodically cleared each room of her apartment. The living room was untouched, and the bedroom looked exactly as she left it. But when she reached the kitchen, her breath caught in her throat. There, on her wooden table, sat a manila envelope that definitely hadn't been there before. With gloved hands, she carefully opened it. Crime scene photos spilled out, stark, brutal images from Daniel West's murder scene. Her stomach churned as she recognized details that had never been released to the public. The exact position of Wes's body, the angle of the gunshot wound, even the scattered papers around his desk. Among the photos was a simple white note card, the message typed in plain black letters. "Stop digging or you'll end up just like him." Ava's mind raced. These photos came from the official case files, files that only someone with police clearance could access. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone inside the department was watching her every move. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and called Noah. "Meet me at the Red Pine Motel outside the city," she said quietly. "Room 115. And Noah, make sure you're not followed." The Red Pine Motel was exactly the kind of place people went to disappear. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign, and not a security camera in sight. Perfect for their needs. Ava arrived first, checking in under a false name while Atlas kept watch. Noah showed up 20 minutes later, his laptop bag clutched tightly to his chest, his eyes wide with excitement despite the late hour. "I got into the police personnel files," he said as soon as the door closed behind him. "Holloway's records. Something's off. His travel logs for the night, Wes was killed, don't match his official reports. He claimed he was at a conference in Springfield, but his vehicle GPS puts him right here in the city." Ava spread the crime scene photos across the bed. "These were left in my apartment. Someone's trying to scare us off." They began connecting the dots, laying out everything they knew about Wes' murder, Holloway's involvement, and Owen's frame-up. Atlas lay near the door, seemingly relaxed but alert. Suddenly, the dog's body went rigid, his ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Before either Ava or Noah could react, the motel window exploded inward with a deafening crack of gunfire. Glass shattered across the motel room as Ava and Noah dropped to the floor. Atlas's powerful bark filled the small space, his body tensed and ready to protect. Another shot ripped through the wooden door, sending splinters flying. Ava's police training kicked in. She rolled behind the bed, gun drawn, and fired 2 quick shots through the broken window. But whoever had attacked them was already gone, leaving only the sound of screeching tires in the distance. "Are you hit?" Ava called out to Noah, who had taken cover behind the bathroom door frame. "No, I'm okay," he said, his voice shaking. "But we need to get out of here." They grabbed their evidence and ran to Ava's car, Atlas leading the way, scanning for threats. The night air was thick with tension as they sped away from the motel, taking back roads to avoid being followed. "I know somewhere we can go," Ava said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Ray has a cabin in the woods. It's off the grid. No one else knows about it." As they drove through the darkness, Noah pulled out his laptop. "I found something else while digging through records," he said, his voice steadier now. Holloway made a wire transfer to a Cayman Islands account 3 days after Wes was murdered. $200,000. No explanation. Ava's jaw tightened. Money to keep someone quiet while they made their escape. Owen faced his own battle inside the prison walls. Victor Crane, his new cellmate, attacked during yard time. It looked like a regular prison fight to the guards watching, but Owen knew better. Crane's moves were too precise, too practiced. Owen managed to block a sharp jab aimed at his throat, countering with a defensive strike that sent Crane stumbling backward. Guards rushed in to break up the fight, but the message was clear. Someone wanted Owen dead before he could expose the truth. The cabin appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky when Ava finally pulled up the narrow dirt road. Atlas jumped out first, circling the perimeter as Ava and Noah carried their equipment inside. The wooden structure was small but secure, hidden by thick trees on all sides. Ava allowed herself to relax slightly, running a hand through her hair. She looked around the rustic interior. This would be safe. This would give them time to. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. The message made her blood run cold. "Nice try, detective, but we always know where to find you." She rushed through the window, peering out into the darkness between the trees. Somewhere in those shadows, hidden eyes were watching. The cabin creaked and groaned throughout the night as wind whistled through the surrounding trees. Ava sat in an old armchair, her gun within reach, watching shadows dance across the walls. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made her muscles tense. Atlas hadn't left her side, his warm body pressed against her legs, ears perking up at each sound from outside. Noah hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, the blue glow of the screen illuminating his tired face. He'd been working nonstop since dawn, diving deep into Daniel West's digital footprint. Cups of cold coffee littered the table around him. "Ava," he called out suddenly, his voice cutting through the morning quiet. "I found something." She moved to look over his shoulder. On the screen was a folder simply labeled insurance, locked behind several layers of encryption. "Can you crack it?" she asked. Noah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Give me time." Hours ticked by. Atlas paced the cabin, while Ava sorted through their existing evidence. Finally, Noah let out a triumphant sound. "I'm in," he said, opening the folder. "Look at this." West's personal notes from the week before he died. Ava leaned closer, reading the hastily scrawled words. Her heart began to race as the pieces fell into place. West had arranged a meeting with someone inside the department, someone who knew what Holloway was doing. The meeting location made her stomach drop. The docks, right where Atlas had found that bullet casing. He never made it to that meeting, Ava said quietly, her voice heavy with realization, because whoever he was supposed to meet ended up dead instead. Meanwhile, in the sterile confines of the prison visiting room, Owen sat across from Ray Callahan. The retired detective looked older than Owen remembered, worry lines etched deeply in his face. "I've been making calls," Ray said in a low voice, glancing at the guard by the door. "Pulling every favor I have left, but Owen..." He leaned forward, his expression grim. "There's no appeal coming. They're pushing your execution date up, fast-tracking it." Owen felt the blood drain from his face. He'd known they wanted him silenced, but this was different. They weren't just trying to keep him locked away. They wanted him dead, and they wanted it done quickly. Back at the cabin, Ava spread West's notes across the table, the truth finally crystallizing in her mind. West had been about to expose everything about Holloway. Someone inside the department, someone with power and influence, had made sure that never happened. Now, those same people were methodically eliminating everyone who might uncover their secret. She looked at the evidence before her. The bullet casing, West's notes, the wire transfer records. Her jaw set with determination as she grabbed her car keys. They were running out of time. She had to act now. Owen sat on his prison cot, his heart hammering against his ribs as Ray's warning echoed in his mind. "They're fast-tracking your execution." The words felt like a physical blow. No more appeals, no delays. Just days left to live. His fingers gripped the edge of the cot until his knuckles turned white. The reality of his situation crashed over him like an icy wave. There was only one option left now, one he'd been avoiding since his arrival. He'd have to break out. That night, Owen lay awake, studying the guards' movements through his cell door. He'd spent months memorizing their patterns. Who took smoke breaks, who arrived late, which corners of the block had blind spots. But Landon Green remained the biggest obstacle. The corrupt guard watched him like a hawk, always hovering nearby, always ready to report back to whoever was pulling the strings. While Owen planned his escape, across town, Ava and Noah hunched over West's notes in the dim light of the cabin. Noah pointed to a recurring mention in the journalist's writings, just 2 letters, JB. "Look here," Noah said, scrolling through department records on his laptop. West kept meeting this JB person, but never wrote down the full name. Ava leaned closer, her eyes scanning the screen as Noah searched through personnel files. Suddenly, he straightened. "Got something. James Beckett, retired officer, served 20 years in the department." They wasted no time, racing to Beckett's last known address, a small house on the outskirts of town. But as they approached, Ava's hand instinctively moved to her gun. The front door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, chaos greeted them. Papers littered the floor, drawers hung open, and furniture lay overturned. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere. Broken lamp, knocked over bookshelf, scattered photos. But Beckett himself was nowhere to be found. Back at the prison, fate handed Owen his opportunity. The sound of shouting erupted from another cell block, followed by the crash of breaking glass. A riot had broken out. Owen watched as guards rushed past the cell, heading toward the commotion. Even Green turned to look. In that moment of distraction, Owen struck. He slammed his food tray into Green's head as the guard passed too close to his cell, dropping him instantly. Owen's fingers fumbled for the key card on Green's belt, yanking it free. His heart pounded as he swiped the card through his cell door's reader. The lock clicked open. He had minutes, maybe less, before they realized he was gone. It was now or never. Ava moved carefully through Beckett's ransacked apartment, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Papers crunched under her feet as she examined the walls, looking for anything the intruders might have missed. Noah searched the desk, sifting through scattered documents. Something caught Ava's eye, a slight discoloration in the wall paint near the baseboard. She knelt down, running her fingers along the surface until she felt it, a tiny seam. Using her pocket knife, she carefully pried at the edge until a small panel popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a single flash drive. "Noah," she called softly, "I need you to look at this." They huddled around Noah's laptop as he worked to decrypt the drive's contents. After several tense minutes, audio files appeared on the screen. Noah clicked the first one, and Daniel West's voice filled the room. "Detective Beckett, can you tell me again about what you saw in Holloway's task force?" The recording continued, revealing Beckett's trembling voice. Asterisk the smuggling operation. It wasn't just drugs. Holloway was moving weapons too, using police resources, our own evidence locker. I couldn't stay quiet. Asterisk. More recordings played, each one more damning than the last. Beckett detailed how he'd gathered evidence against Holloway and how he'd reached out to West as a last resort. But the most chilling revelation came near the end. "Holloway knows," Beckett's voice whispered. "He called me into his office yesterday, told me to take early retirement or they retire me permanently." Meanwhile, at the prison, Owen pressed himself against the wall of the exercise yard, heart pounding. The guard tower spotlight swept past him as he inched toward the outer fence. Just 20 more feet. 15, 10. The night air suddenly filled with the piercing wail of alarms. Owen's escape had been discovered. Shouts erupted from the guard tower as flashlight beams began dancing across the yard. He had seconds before they found him. Back at Beckett's apartment, Ava clicked on the final recording. West and Beckett's voices were hushed, urgent. "There's someone else," West said. "Someone who helped set up Cooper." "Yeah," Beckett replied. "A cop. Someone Holloway trusted to handle the dirty work." "Who?" "Detective Ray Callahan. He planted the evidence, made sure Cooper took the fall." Ava's blood ran cold as the recording ended. Ray, her mentor, the man she'd trusted, had helped frame Owen all along. Ava's hand shook as she stared at the laptop screen, her world tilting on its axis. Ray Callahan, the man who taught her everything she knew about being a detective, who guided her through her rookie years, was part of this conspiracy. "It can't be right," she whispered, but Noah was already pulling up bank records on a screen. "Look at these deposits," he said, pointing to several large transactions, all from offshore accounts, all within days of West's murder. Ray's financial records show he was struggling before this, mortgage behind, medical bills piling up. Then suddenly he's flush with cash. Ava felt sick. The evidence was right there, but her mind refused to accept it. She pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over Ray's number. After a deep breath, she pressed call. "Meet me at OMAL's," she said when he answered. "We need to talk." The bar was nearly empty when Ray walked in. His weathered face creased with its usual calm expression. He slid into the booth across from Ava, ordering a whiskey neat from the passing waitress. Ava didn't speak. Instead, she took the flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. Ray's eyes fixed on it, and something in his expression shifted. Just slightly, but enough for Ava to see the crack in his facade. "I never wanted you involved in this, kid," he said, his voice cold and measured. All pretense of the warm mentor was gone. "You should have left it alone." "Did you help frame Owen?" Ava's voice cracked slightly. Ray's shoulders sagged. "Yes," he admitted. "Holloway had things on me. Things that would have destroyed everything, my career, my family, all of it. He just wanted Wes silenced, the murder." He shook his head. "That wasn't part of the plan." Meanwhile, across town, Owen Cooper scaled the prison's perimeter fence, his heart pounding in his ears. Gunshots cracked through the night air, missing him by inches. He reached the top and threw himself over, landing hard on the other side. Pain exploded through his shoulder. Dislocated. He realized through the haze of agony, but he couldn't stop. He made it 3 steps before bright headlights blinded him. A black SUV appeared from nowhere, tires screeching as it stopped directly in his path. The back door flew open, and hands reached for him, yanking him inside before he could react. Back at OMAL's, Ray leaned across the table, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You have no idea how deep this goes." His hand moved slowly, deliberately, and Ava tensed. But instead of drawing a weapon, he slid a gun across the table toward her. "You have one chance to walk away, Ava," he said quietly. "Do it." On the other side, Owen thrashed against the iron grip of 2 men holding him down in the SUV's backseat. His dislocated shoulder screamed in protest, but he kept fighting until cold metal pressed into his ribs. "You really should have stayed put, Cooper," one of the men growled, jamming the gun harder against his side. The SUV wound through empty streets, finally pulling up to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. The men dragged Owen inside, his feet scraping against concrete. The musty air smelled of rust and decay. A figure emerged from the shadows. Marcus Holloway, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the rundown surroundings. He looked down at Owen with cold disdain, like someone examining an unwelcome pest. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" Holloway's voice echoed in the empty space. Meanwhile, across town at OMAL's bar, Ava's hand closed around the gun Ray had slid across the table in one fluid motion. She lifted it and aimed it directly at her former mentor's chest. "You're going to help me take Holloway down," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Ray leaned back, a hint of pride flickering across his weathered features. "You really are just like Owen," he said softly. Back at the warehouse, Holloway circled Owen like a shark, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. He stopped directly in front of Owen, crouching down to meet his eyes. "I don't care what your little detective friend finds," Holloway said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You won't live long enough to see her fix this." Owen's muscles tensed as he assessed the situation. 2 men holding him, Holloway in front, probably more guards outside. His shoulder was useless, but he still had a chance. A small one, but it was now or never. If he didn't make his move right now, this warehouse would become his grave. He gathered his strength, preparing to fight. Owen sat bound to a metal chair in the center of the warehouse, blood trickling down his temple where one of Holloway's men had struck him. The copper taste in his mouth reminded him this was real. No nightmare he could wake up from. Dim light filtered through grimy windows high above, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Across from him, Marcus Holloway lounged against a wooden crate, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. His expensive suit looked out of place in the decrepit building, but his eyes held the same coldness as the space around them. "You should have just accepted your fate, Cooper," Holloway said, taking a measured sip of whiskey. "Now you've made this messy." Owen worked his wrists against the rope, feeling for any give. His shoulder throbbed from the earlier dislocation, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing instead on his surroundings. For guards stationed around the room, their weapons visible. A heavy metal door stood locked at the far end. His gaze caught on a length of pipe lying just a few feet away. If he could loosen these bindings enough. Holloway's overconfidence was evident in his relaxed posture, in the way he savored his drink like this was just another business meeting. He thought he'd won, but Owen had survived worse odds before. Across town, Ava and Ray huddled over a laptop where Noah had traced an encrypted text from Holloway. The signal pointed to an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts. "He won't stop at Owen," Ray said, his voice gruff. "Holloway will keep killing until there's no one left who knows the truth. Asterisk, including me. Asterisk." He watched as Ava checked her weapon and strapped on her vest. "I'm going in," she said, her jaw set with determination. Ray stared at her for a long moment before cursing under his breath. He grabbed his own gun from the desk drawer, checking the magazine. "Damn it, kid. Let's go save your idiot partner." Back in the warehouse, Owen felt the rope give slightly around his wrists. His heart quickened, but he kept his expression neutral as Holloway approached, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. "Your execution is still happening, Cooper," Holloway said, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey. "Just not in the way you expected." The guards moved toward Owen, their boots scraping against concrete. But this time, Owen wasn't helpless. This time, he was ready. Owen's muscles tensed as he felt the rope finally give way. In one fluid motion, he snapped his hands free and lunged for the metal pipe lying nearby. The cold steel felt solid in his grip as he swung hard, connecting with the first guard's knee. A sickening crack echoed through the warehouse, followed by the guard's howl of pain as he crumpled to the ground. The second guard fumbled for his weapon, but Owen was faster. He kicked the nearby table with all his strength, sending it crashing into the guard. The gun went skittering across the concrete floor. Owen dove for it, his fingers almost brushing the grip, when the third guard slammed into him from behind. They hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from Owen's lungs. The guard's fist connected with his jaw, stars exploding behind his eyes. Owen fought back, landing a solid punch to the man's ribs. They rolled across the floor, trading brutal blows. Through the chaos, Holloway remained eerily calm. He sat down his whiskey glass with deliberate care and walked unhurried to the exit. The heavy steel door closed behind him with a definitive click of the lock. He had no intention of getting his hands dirty. That's what his men were for. Outside the warehouse, Ava and Ray moved silently through the shadows. They found 2 perimeter guards by the back entrance, quickly subduing them with precise strikes. Neither Ava nor Ray spoke. Their mutual distrust hung between them like a wall. But right now, Owen's life mattered more than their suspicions. Inside, Owen grappled with the last standing guard. His body ached from the fight, but adrenaline kept him moving. They crashed into a stack of rusted machinery, metal parts scattering across the floor. Owen's hand found a jagged piece of scrap metal. Without hesitation, he drove it into his attacker's side. The guard gasped and stumbled backward, clutching the wound before collapsing. Breathing heavily, Owen staggered to his feet. He limped to the locked door and kicked it with everything he had left. The door burst open, and there stood Holloway, his gun aimed squarely at Owen's head. Before Holloway could squeeze the trigger, a shot cracked through the air. Holloway jerked backward, blood blooming on his sleeve as the bullet tore through his arm. He stumbled, his face contorting in pain and shock. Ava and Ray stood in the warehouse entrance, their weapons trained steadily on Holloway's hands. "Where can I see them?" Ava commanded, her voice as cold as steel. Holloway's laughter echoed through the warehouse, dark and unsettling. Despite the blood soaking his sleeve, his eyes gleamed with a dangerous light as he sneered at them. "You really think you can stop this?" He shook his head, almost amused. "You have no proof." Ava stepped forward, her gun never wavering from his chest. "Actually, we do." Ray's hand moved smoothly as he tossed a small black device onto the concrete floor. The recorder clattered between them, its red light blinking steadily. It had captured everything since they entered the warehouse, every threat, every admission. "It's over," Owen said, moving to stand beside Ava. His voice was steady, certain. But Holloway's smile didn't fade. In one fluid motion, he reached behind his back and pulled out a concealed knife. The blade glinted in the dim light as he lunged at Ava. She squeezed the trigger, but Holloway was faster than they expected. He knocked her gun aside, the knife slashing across her side. Ava stumbled backward with a sharp gasp, pressing her hand against the spreading red stain on her shirt. Owen didn't hesitate. He charged forward, ramming into Holloway with his full weight. They crashed together, trading vicious blows. Holloway fought like a cornered animal, all precision lost to desperate fury. With a sudden twist, Holloway gained the upper hand. He slammed Owen against a metal beam, pinning him there. The knife rose high, ready for a killing stroke. That's when Atlas struck. The dog burst through the warehouse entrance, like a furious shadow, launching himself at Holloway. His powerful jaws clamped down on Holloway's wrist, drawing a scream of pain from the man. The knife clattered to the floor as Atlas's teeth dug deeper. Ray moved swiftly, snatching up Ava's fallen gun. He aimed it at Holloway's head, his expression grim. "You're done, Marcus." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Ava had managed to call it in before they'd entered the warehouse. As the sound of approaching backup filled the air, Holloway's face twisted into a bitter smile. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "You have no idea how deep this goes." Ava and Owen's eyes met across the warehouse floor, both knowing this victory might only be the beginning. The arrest of Marcus Holloway should have been the end, but something felt off. Evidence started disappearing from the police archives. First, the original ballistics report, then key witness statements. Someone was still working behind the scenes, trying to bury the truth. 3 more files went missing this morning. "Noah," said Ava, her voice tight. "They're getting sloppy, though. I managed to back everything up. The process of clearing Owen's name dragged on. The department, embarrassed by the scandal, tried to handle things quietly. But Ava and Noah had other plans. They compiled everything, the recordings, the missing evidence, Holloway's operation, and sent it to every major news outlet in the city. The story exploded. Headlines screamed about police corruption and cover-ups. The public demanded answers, and for once, the department couldn't sweep it under the rug. Owen's exoneration came through on a Tuesday morning. The same afternoon, Ray Callahan showed up at Ava's apartment. He looked tired, older somehow. "I'm leaving town," he said simply. "Too many people want me dead now." He glanced between Ava and Owen, who had been reviewing case files at her kitchen table. Atlas watched him wearily from his spot by Owen's feet. "I never thought you two would actually pull this off," Ray admitted, shaking his head. Owen's voice was cold when he responded. "You're lucky we didn't kill you." Ray's mouth twisted into a knowing smirk. Without another word, he turned and walked away into the darkness. Ava and Owen stood on her balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The media frenzy was already dying down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrage. Life moved on. Weeks passed. The beach was quiet except for the gentle lap of waves. Owen sat in the sand, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on his face. Atlas dozed beside him, occasionally twitching in his sleep. The sound of footsteps in the sand made him look up. Ava approached, 2 beers in hand. She tossed one his way and settled down next to him. "So, what now?" she asked, looking out at the orange-streaked horizon. Owen took a long drink before answering. "We keep going." He let out a contented sigh between them as the sun dipped lower. For the first time in years, Owen took a deep, free breath. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of Ava's office as she pored over financial records spread across her desk. Most people believed the case was closed. Marcus Holloway was behind bars, awaiting trial in a maximum security prison. But something didn't sit right with her. Atlas lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head when she muttered to herself. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed a pattern in the records, a series of wire transfers from an offshore account that should have been frozen weeks ago. "This is impossible," she whispered, reaching for her phone to call Owen. Within an hour, Owen and Noah were in her office, examining the evidence. Noah's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as he traced the money trail. "These transactions," Noah said, pointing to his screen, "they're being routed through shell companies, but they all lead to one place." "Where?" Ava asked. "Riverdale Maximum Security Prison," Noah answered. Owen leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "The warden, James Morrison," Ava confirmed, pulling up his file. "He's been there for 15 years. Spotless record. But these numbers don't lie. He's received over $500,000 in the past month alone." They dug deeper. Noah hacked into encrypted emails, while Ava and Owen called their remaining trusted contacts inside the prison system. The picture that emerged was chilling. Holloway had effectively turned his cell into a command center, with Morrison ensuring he had everything he needed to continue operating. Their suspicions were confirmed when the news broke. Guard Timothy Chun was found dead in Holloway's cell block. Chun had been a key witness in the case against Holloway, his testimony crucial to the conviction. "This isn't a coincidence," Owen said, pacing Ava's office. Chun was about to testify again at the federal trial. Ava's phone rang, displaying an unknown number. She hesitated before answering, putting it on speaker. "Detective Mitchell," a familiar voice drawled. "Holloway, I've been expecting your call." Ava's hand tightened around the phone. "How did you get this number?" Holloway's laugh echoed through the speaker. "I told you, Detective. You think this is over? I'm just getting started." The line went dead, leaving them in stunned silence. Atlas growled softly, sensing the tension in the room. The federal prosecutor, Jenna Chun, leaned back in her chair, studying the evidence spread across her desk. Owen and Ava had spent the last hour making their case, explaining how Holloway was still operating his network from inside prison. "We need him in complete isolation," Owen insisted. "No visitors, no phone calls, no contact with other inmates." Chun shook her head. "Without concrete proof of ongoing criminal activity, I can't justify that level of restriction. The prison board won't approve it." Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. *park 20 minutes. "Come alone, *. She recognized Ray's cryptic style immediately. "I need to handle something," she said, standing up. "Owen, finish briefing Miss Chun at the park." Ray waited in the shadows of an old oak tree. He looked different, thinner, with graying stubble and tired eyes. "Holloway's planning something big," he said without preamble. "He's arranged an escape during his upcoming transfer to federal custody." Ava's pulse quickened. "How do you know?" "I still have contacts," Ray replied. "His people are going to hit the transport van. They've got everything planned, routes, timing, backup plans. It's happening next." A week back at Ava's apartment, she and Owen formulated their counterplan. Atlas lay between them, ears perking up whenever they mentioned Holloway's name. "We feed false information through Ray," Owen suggested. "Make them think the transfer is happening a day early. When they show up, we'll be waiting." Ava finished, with SWAT and FBI backup. They spent the next few days setting everything in motion. Ray played his part perfectly, feeding Holloway's people the wrong date through their prison contacts. They confirmed Holloway had taken the bait. He was practically gloating about his imminent freedom. "There's one more thing we need," Ava said, looking down at Atlas. The dog stared back, alert and ready. "He's found more evidence than most detectives. We bring him with us." Owen nodded, remembering how Atlas had led them to crucial evidence before. "He's earned it." They positioned SWAT teams along the false transport route, with FBI agents hidden at strategic points. Ava and Owen took their positions, with Atlas waiting in an unmarked car near where Holloway's men would likely strike. Through their earpieces, they heard the all-clear signals from various teams. Everything was in place now. They just had to wait for Holloway's people to spring their trap, not realizing they were the ones being trapped. Atlas suddenly stiffened in the back seat, his ears forward. Ava checked her watch, right on schedule. In the distance, they could see several black SUVs approaching slowly. All units hold position. Owen whispered into his radio. Let them make the first move. The SUVs spread out across the road, clearly preparing to box in what they thought would be the prison transport. Armed men emerged from the vehicles, weapons ready. Now, Ava breathed into her radio. Suddenly, floodlights blazed alive, illuminating the entire area. SWAT teams emerged from their hiding spots. FBI agents moved in from all sides. Atlas let out a deep growl as the night erupted into chaos. The night exploded into chaos as floodlights flooded the area. SWAT teams converged from all directions, their commands echoing through the darkness. Holloway's men, caught off guard, returned fire desperately. The air crackled with gunshots and shouts. Marcus Torres, Holloway's right-hand man, went down first. 2 clean shots from a SWAT sniper left him sprawled on the asphalt. But as the dust settled and the shooting stopped, something was wrong. Holloway wasn't among the captured men. He's not here. Ava called out to Owen, her voice tight with frustration. He knew. Somehow he knew. Owen scanned the area, his jaw clenched. Split up. He has to be close. They moved through the compound, methodically checking every shadow and corner. Atlas padded alongside Ava, nose to the ground. Suddenly, the dog's head snapped up, his ears perked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Atlas darted forward, leading them to what looked like an old maintenance shed. Inside, hidden beneath some rotting floorboards, they found a tunnel entrance. Clever, Owen muttered, drawing his weapon. The tunnel was narrow, barely lit by emergency lights that cast everything in an eerie red glow. They hadn't gone far when they heard it. Footsteps ahead, then Holloway's voice echoed off the concrete walls. "You've been a real pain, detective," he said, emerging from the shadows, gun trained on them. A smirk played across his face. "But let's end this, shall we?" Owen moved fast, knocking the gun from Holloway's hand before he could fire. The 2 men crashed into each other, fists flying. Holloway landed a heavy blow to Owen's ribs, making him stumble. Owen recovered, countering with a sharp jab to Holloway's jaw. Blood sprayed as Holloway's elbow connected with Owen's nose. The former deputy chief was stronger, his prison workouts evident in his powerful strikes. He caught Owen with an uppercut that sent him reeling back against the tunnel wall. Holloway advanced, ready to finish it, but he'd forgotten about Atlas. The dog launched himself forward, powerful jaws clamping down on Holloway's arm. Holloway screamed, trying to shake the dog loose, but Atlas held firm. Owen seized his chance. He pushed off the wall and threw everything he had into one final punch. His fist connected with Holloway's temple, and the man crumpled to the ground. Ava rushed forward, handcuffs in hand, securing them tightly around Holloway's wrists. "Marcus Holloway," she said, unable to keep the satisfaction from her voice. "You're under arrest." They marched him out of the tunnel where FBI agents were waiting. This time, there would be no deals, no chances for escape. His network was exposed, his allies captured or turned. As the agents led him to a waiting vehicle, Owen, Ava, and Atlas stood together, watching the man who had nearly destroyed their lives being taken away for good. Atlas sat between them, his tail wagging contentedly. His mission, their mission, was finally complete. Weeks passed like a gentle tide, washing away the remnants of their ordeal. Owen stood in the police chief's office, watching as his record was officially cleared. The chief slid Owen's badge across the desk, its surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Welcome back, Detective Cooper," the chief said. But Owen shook his head. "I'm done with the badge," he told Ava later as they walked through the park. Atlas trotted ahead of them, his tail wagging freely. "I just want to live." Ava understood. She faced her own crossroads at the department. The brass had offered her a promotion, detective sergeant with her own unit. It came with a corner office and a substantial pay raise, but the offer felt hollow, tainted by years of watching the system protect its own. One morning, she walked into the chief's office and handed in her resignation. The decision felt right, like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. She rented a small office downtown, nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a waiting area. The sign on the door read Mitchell Investigations. Noah was her first hire, bringing his tech expertise and investigative skills. When Owen showed up with coffee one morning, she didn't even have to ask. He simply sat down and started reviewing case files. Together, they built something new, something honest. Their first case involved exposing a corrupt judge. Their second uncovered an embezzlement scheme at a local charity. With each success, their reputation grew. They became known as the people who would dig for the truth, no matter how deep it was buried. Atlas finally got the retirement he deserved. No more long nights on stakeouts or chasing down suspects. His days were filled with long walks, endless games of fetch, and plenty of belly rubs. The old police dog seemed to smile more these days, his eyes bright and playful. On a warm evening, Owen and Ava sat on the beach, watching Atlas chase seagulls along the shoreline. The sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and the beer in their hands had grown comfortably warm. Ava nudged Owen's shoulder. "You ever going to settle down?" Owen took a slow sip of his beer, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Maybe. Ava raised an eyebrow, her tone teasing. Owen watched as Atlas bounded through the shallow waves, barking joyfully at the rushing water. His smile grew wider, more genuine than she'd seen in years. "We'll see." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting everything in golden light. For the first time in years, the future stretched out before them like an open road full of possibility, and finally, completely theirs. If you enjoyed the story of Owen and Atlas, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.